The stagecoach door swung open, and a woman stumbled out into the dusty streets of Lordsburg, New Mexico. Her left eye swollen purple and her dress torn at the shoulder, carrying nothing but the desperate hope that whatever lay ahead had to be better than what she'd left behind. Dylan Matthews stood outside the general store, a bag of grain hoisted over his shoulder, when he saw her nearly collapse against the wooden post that held up the awning of the stage office. It was late afternoon in the summer of 1878, and the heat shimmered off the hard, packed earth like liquid glass. He set down his load and moved toward her without thinking, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. "Madam." His voice was gentle despite his rough appearance. At 26 years old, Dylan had the weathered look of a man who'd spent most of his life under the unforgiving sun, but his eyes were kind. "You all right?" The woman looked up at him, and he saw past the injury to the exhaustion etched in every line of her face. She couldn't have been more than 23 or 24, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and green eyes that held both fear and defiance in equal measure. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice shook and her knees buckled. Dylan caught her before she hit the ground, steadying her with strong hands. "You don't look fine. When's the last time you ate?" She didn't answer, but her body told the story her mouth wouldn't. He could feel how thin she was through the fabric of her dress, could see the way her lips were cracked from dehydration. "Come on," he said, guiding her toward the restaurant across the street. "Let's get some food in you." "I can't pay," she whispered, shame coloring her cheeks despite the exhaustion. "Didn't ask you to." Dylan kept his hand under her elbow, supporting her weight as they crossed the street. The few people on the boardwalk watched with undisguised curiosity, but he ignored them. Small towns like Lordsburg thrived on gossip, but he'd never cared much for what people thought. Inside the restaurant, the owner, Martha Hayes, took one look at the woman and hurried over with a glass of water. "Good Lord, Dylan, what happened?" "Don't know yet," he said, helping the woman into a chair. "But she needs food and probably a place to stay." Martha nodded, her motherly instincts taking over. "I'll bring soup. Easy on the stomach if she hasn't eaten in a while." The woman drank the water slowly, her hands trembling as she held the glass. Dylan sat across from her, giving her space but staying close enough to help if she needed it. "I'm Dylan Matthews," he said. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles outside town. Run cattle mostly." She set down the glass and met his eyes. "Delilah Harper. Used to be Delilah Harper anyway. I suppose I still am, legally speaking." The way she said it told him volumes. Running from a husband was a husband. Don't know what you'd call him now. She touched the bruise around her eye unconsciously. "This wasn't the first time, but I decided it would be the last." Martha arrived with a bowl of chicken soup and a basket of bread. "You eat up, honey. You're safe here." Delilah's eyes filled with tears at the kindness, and she blinked them back fiercely. "Thank you." Dylan watched her eat, noting the way she forced herself to go slow even though he could tell she was starving. She had pride, this woman. Backbone. He liked that. "Where were you headed?" He asked after she'd eaten about half the soup. "Anywhere but Santa Fe, that's where he is." She paused, her spoon hovering over the bowl. "I thought maybe I could find work here. I can clean, cook, so I'm good with numbers too. I used to keep the books for my father's dry goods store before he passed." "The general store might need help," Martha said, refilling Delilah's water glass. "Old Mr. Chen's been complaining about his arthritis making it hard to manage inventory." Dylan leaned back in his chair, an idea forming. "My ranch could use someone to keep the books, and my house needs a woman's touch. My housekeeper left last month to live with her daughter in California, and I haven't found a replacement." Delilah's eyes narrowed slightly. "I won't be any man's mistress, Mr. Matthews. I'd rather starve." That's not what I'm offering. Dylan held her gaze steadily. I'm offering honest work for honest pay. You'd have your own room, your own space. I've got 2 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, and they can vouch that I'm not the kind of man who takes advantage. Then why help me? You don't know me. Don't need to know you to see you need help. He pushed back from the table and stood. Think about it. I'm staying at the boarding house tonight, heading back to the ranch tomorrow morning. If you want the job, meet me at the livery at sunrise. He paid Martha for the meal and left before Delilah could respond. He'd learned a long time ago that people needed space to make their own decisions, especially people who'd had their choices taken from them. That night, Dylan lay in the narrow bed at the boarding house and stared at the ceiling. He couldn't stop thinking about the fear in Delilah's eyes when she'd first stumbled out of that stagecoach. He'd seen that look before, on a wild horse that had been beaten, and it stirred something protective in him. But more than that, there was something in the way she'd held herself despite her circumstances, a strength that drew him in. He'd been alone at the ranch for 3 years now, ever since his parents had died in a winter storm. His younger brother had moved to Denver, wanting nothing to do with ranch life, and Dylan had bought out his share. It was good land, with a reliable water source and enough grazing for a decent herd. He'd built it up slowly, carefully, and now he was starting to see real profit. But the house was empty except for him, and lately, the silence had been getting harder to bear. The next morning, the sun was just painting the eastern sky pink when Dylan arrived at the livery. He'd already saddled his horse and was loading supplies into the saddlebags when he heard footsteps behind him. Delilah stood in the doorway, backlit by the rising sun. She'd cleaned up as best she could, though the bruise around her eye had darkened overnight. She carried a small carpet bag that looked like it contained everything she owned. "The job still available?" she asked. "It is." Dylan secured the last bag and turned to face her. "But we should get something straight first. You'll be working for me, not with me. That means you'll have your own money, your own independence. If you don't like the arrangement, you can leave any time. I won't stop you." "Why are you doing this?" The question came out almost angry. "Men don't just help women out of kindness. What do you want?" Dylan considered her for a long moment. "My mother used to say that the measure of a person is what they do when they have nothing to gain. I've got a good life, Miss Harper. Good land, good work. Seems to me that means I ought to help when I can." Delilah's expression softened slightly. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was." Dylan gestured to the bugboard wagon he'd brought instead of riding horseback. "Thought this might be more comfortable for the ride out." They traveled in silence for the first hour, the wagon wheels creaking steadily as they left Lordsburg behind. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all red rock and scrub brush punctuated by the occasional cottonwood tree. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow despite the summer heat. "Tell me about the ranch," Delilah said finally. Dylan kept his eyes on the road. "About 800 acres, give or take. I run about 200 head of cattle, though I'm hoping to expand. Got 2 hands working for me. Carlos has been with the ranch since my father's time, and his son Miguel joined up last year. Good men, both of them. They'll treat you with respect or answer to me. And the work you need done. Books mainly. I'm not bad with numbers, but I don't have the time to keep proper records. The house needs regular cleaning, cooking if you're willing, though I won't force it. Carlos's wife, Rosa, usually sends meals over, but she's got her own family to care for." He paused. "And company. House gets lonely with just me rattling around in it." Delilah was quiet for a moment. "I don't know if I'm ready for company, for talking about things. Then we won't talk. We'll just exist in the same space. That's company enough." She looked at him with something like surprise. "You're not what I expected, Mr. Matthews." "Dylan, if you're going to be living on my ranch, we might as well use first names. Then you should call me Delilah." The ranch appeared as they crested a low hill, and Dylan felt the familiar swell of pride in his chest. The house was modest but well built, 2 stories with a wide porch that caught the evening breeze. The barn was larger, newly painted, and corrals stretched out behind it where horses moved lazily in the morning sun. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney, even in summer, probably from Rose's cooking. "It's beautiful," Delilah said softly. "It's home." Dylan pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. "Come on, I'll show you your room and then we can discuss the details." The inside of the house was clean but sparse, decorated with the bare minimum of furniture and completely lacking any feminine touch. Dylan led her upstairs to a corner room with windows on 2 walls that let in plenty of light. "This was going to be my sister's room," he said. "But she died of fever when she was 12. Mother could never bring herself to use it for anything else." The room held a bed with a simple quilt, a dresser, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. It was more than Delilah had hoped for. "It's perfect," she said, setting down her carpet bag. "Good." Dylan moved back toward the door. "Get yourself settled. I'll be in the office downstairs when you're ready to look at the books." He left her alone, and Delilah sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process the sudden turn her life had taken. 2 days ago, she'd been trapped in a marriage that was slowly killing her spirit if not her body. She'd taken nothing but the clothes on her back and the small amount of money she'd hidden from her husband, enough for a stagecoach ticket, and not much more. Now she was on a ranch in New Mexico with a cowboy who seemed too good to be true. She stood and went to the window, looking out over the land. Cattle dotted the distant hills, and she could see 2 men working with horses in the corral. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, so blue it almost hurt to look at. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. Downstairs, Dylan was in the office, a small room off the main living area that held a desk, filing cabinets, and shelves of books. The ledgers were stacked on the desk, and he was frowning at them when Delilah appeared in the doorway. "That bad?" she asked. "Not bad, just disorganized. I keep meaning to sort it out, but by the time I'm done with the day's work, the last thing I want to do is paperwork." Delilah moved to the desk and opened the top ledger. Her practiced eye quickly assessed the situation. "You've got income and expenses mixed together. And you're not tracking your inventory properly. If you don't know how many head you have at any given time, you can't plan for the future." "That's what I figured." Dylan leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. "Think you can sort it out? Give me a week." She looked up at him. "What are you paying? Room, board, and $30 a month. That fair?" It was more than fair. It was generous. Most housekeepers made half that. "That's acceptable. Then we have a deal." Dylan extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Delilah shook it. His hand was rough with calluses, but his grip was gentle. The first week passed in a blur of activity. Delilah threw herself into organizing the office, creating new ledgers with proper columns and categories. She inventoried the supplies in the house, made lists of what was needed, and began to establish a routine. Dylan was gone most days, out on the range with Carlos and Miguel, returning only for dinner and the evening. They ate together in the kitchen, simple meals that Delilah prepared from the supplies in the pantry. The conversation was stilted at first, neither of them quite sure what to say, but gradually they began to relax around each other. "How long have you been running the ranch alone?" Delilah asked one evening as they ate beef stew. 3 years. "My parents died in a blizzard. They'd gone to check on the cattle and got caught when the weather turned. By the time we found them, it was too late." Dylan stared into his stew. My brother left right after the funeral. Said he couldn't stand to be here anymore. I'm sorry. Delilah knew the inadequacy of those words, but they were all she had. What about you? How'd you end up married to a man who hit you? She'd been expecting the question, but it still made her tense. I was young and stupid. My father died and left me with nothing but debts. Robert Harper seemed like a solution. He had money, said he'd take care of everything. She laughed bitterly. He did, I suppose. He paid off the debts and then made sure I knew I owed him for the rest of my life. You don't owe him anything. Dylan's voice was firm. Man who raises his hand to a woman isn't a man at all. He'll come looking for me eventually. Men like Robert don't like it when their property runs away. You're not property, and if he shows up here, he'll have to go through me. Delilah felt something warm unfold in her chest at his words. You don't have to fight my battles. Not fighting your battles, just standing beside you while you fight them. Dylan met her eyes. There's a difference. As the days turned into weeks, Delilah found herself settling into life on the ranch in a way she'd never expected. She woke with the sun, prepared breakfast, and spent the mornings working on the books. The afternoons were hers to do with as she pleased, and she found herself drawn to the garden behind the house that had been neglected since Dylan's mother died. She started small, clearing away the weeds and dead plants, discovering the bones of what had once been a thriving vegetable garden. Dylan noticed what she was doing and brought her seeds from town on his next supply run. Mother loved that garden, he said, handing her the packets. She used to say that anything that could grow in this harsh land was worth nurturing. Delilah took the seeds with careful hands. I'll do my best. That's all anyone can do. She planted tomatoes, beans, squash, and peppers, working in the cool of the early morning before the sun became too intense. The physical labor was satisfying in a way that keeping books never could be, and she found herself looking forward to checking on the progress of the tiny green shoots that began to push through the soil. Dylan often found excuses to work near the house in the afternoons, repairing fence posts or maintaining equipment, close enough that they could talk if they wanted to, but far enough to give her space. Delilah appreciated the consideration, the way he never pushed or demanded anything from her. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after her arrival, she was in the garden when she heard raised voices from the barn. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, and saw Dylan and Carlos in heated discussion. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the tension in Dylan's shoulders. When he came to the house that evening, his face was troubled. "What's wrong?" Delilah asked, setting aside the ledger she'd been updating. "Cattle have been going missing. Just a few at a time, easy to miss if you're not paying attention. But I've been doing the counts you set up, and we're down almost 20 head over the past month. Rustlers, probably, or it could be Apaches. The reservation's not far from here, and the government's been cutting their rations again." Dylan scrubbed a hand over his face. "I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I need to find out what's happening." "What will you do?" "Carlos, Miguel, and I will ride out tomorrow, see if we can pick up a trail. I need you to stay here, keep the doors locked." Delilah felt a flutter of fear. "How long will you be gone?" "A few days at most. Rosa will check on you." He paused. "I wouldn't go if I didn't have to, I know." And she did. In the weeks she'd been there, she'd learned that Dylan took his responsibilities seriously. The ranch was his livelihood, and losing cattle was a serious problem. Be careful. "Always am." He gave her a small smile. "Besides, I've got something to come back to now. Makes a man cautious." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks, and she looked away. "I'll keep things running here," she said. Dylan left before dawn the next morning. Delilah woke to the sound of horses and low voices, and by the time she made it to the window, he was already riding out with Carlos and Miguel. She watched until they disappeared into the early morning shadows, an unfamiliar ache in her chest. The first day alone wasn't so bad. She kept busy with her usual tasks, working in the garden and updating the ledgers. Rosa came by in the afternoon with a basket of food and her youngest daughter, Maria, a bright-eyed girl of 8 who chattered happily about everything and nothing. The second day was harder. The house felt empty in a way it hadn't before Dylan left. Delilah found herself listening for the sound of his boots on the porch, the rumble of his voice. She'd grown accustomed to his presence, she realized, to the quiet comfort of knowing he was near. On the third day, a rider approached the ranch just after noon. Delilah was in the garden when she heard the hoofbeats, and she stood, shading her eyes against the sun. Her heart sank as she recognized the man on the horse. Robert Harper dismounted in front of the house, his expensive suit dusty from travel but his eyes as cold and hard as she remembered. He was a handsome man in a brutal way, with dark hair and sharp features that had once fooled her into thinking he was distinguished. "Delilah," he called out, "time to come home." She stayed where she was, her hand gripping the garden hoe. "This is my home now. Don't be ridiculous." He moved toward her, his boots crunching on the dry earth. "You're my wife, you belong with me. I belong to myself." Her voice shook, but she held her ground. "I'm not going back." Robert's expression darkened. "I've spent weeks tracking you down. Do you have any idea what you've cost me?" The embarrassment, the gossip. He was close enough now that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You're coming back, even if I have to drag you. She's not going anywhere with you." Both Delilah and Robert turned to see Dylan standing near the barn, his rifle held loosely in his hands. He must have come back early, must have been working on something and heard the commotion. His face was calm, but his eyes were ice cold. "Who the hell are you?" Robert demanded. "Dylan Matthews. This is my ranch and she's under my protection." Dylan moved closer, placing himself between Robert and Delilah. "You need to leave. She's my wife. I have a legal right to her. You have no rights here, not legal, not moral, not any kind." Dylan's voice was steady but hard. "I'm going to ask you once more to leave. After that, I won't ask." Robert's hand moved toward the gun at his hip, and everything seemed to happen at once. Dylan's rifle came up in a smooth, practiced motion, and the sound of the hammer being cocked echoed in the quiet afternoon. "Don't," Dylan said quietly. "I'm a fair shot, and at this distance I won't miss." For a long moment the three of them stood frozen. Then Robert's hand slowly moved away from his gun. "This isn't over," he said, his eyes moving past Dylan to fix on Delilah. "You're still my wife. The law is on my side." "Then let the law sort it out," Dylan said. "But you're not taking her today. Now get on your horse and ride out." Robert mounted up, his movements jerky with anger. "You're making a mistake, Cowboy, both of you." He wheeled his horse around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Delilah's knees gave out and she sat down hard in the dirt. Dylan was at her side in an instant, the rifle set aside, his hands gentle as he helped her up. "You all right?" She was shaking, adrenaline flooding through her system. "How did you know? You weren't supposed to be back until tomorrow." "We tracked the rustlers to a camp about 15 miles north. Turned out to be a group of desperate men passing through, not a regular operation. We made it clear they should move along." He kept his hands on her arms, steadying her. "Carlos and Miguel are driving the recovered cattle back. I wanted to check on you. I'm glad you did." The words came out as barely more than a whisper. Dylan led her to the porch and sat her down in one of the rocking chairs. He knelt in front of her, his expression serious. "He's right about one thing," Dylan said. "The law does generally side with husbands. If he pushes this, if he goes to the sheriff, it could get complicated. I know. Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. I should leave. I've brought my trouble to your door. You're not going anywhere. Dylan took her hand, and the gesture felt natural, right? But we need to think about how to handle this. There's no handling it. I'm married to him, and unless I can prove he abused me in front of witnesses, no judge will grant me a divorce. Then we need another solution. Dylan paused, and she could see him working through something in his mind. When he spoke again, his voice was careful. What if you weren't married to him anymore? That's not how it works. Divorce isn't easy, especially not for women. I'm not talking about divorce. Dylan's eyes met hers. A marriage can be dissolved if the wife remarries. If you married someone else, took his name, Robert's claim would be void. Delilah stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. You mean commit bigamy? That's illegal. Not if the first marriage was forced or fraudulent. You said you married him under duress to pay off debts. A good lawyer might be able to argue that wasn't a valid marriage to begin with. And where would I find a good lawyer? I have no money for that. I do. Dylan was still holding her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. I have savings. We could hire someone, get the paperwork sorted out. But in the meantime, if you were married to me, Robert couldn't touch you. You'd be legally under my protection. You're talking about marrying me. Delilah's voice came out flat with shock. I am. You don't know me. Not really. We've lived in the same house for 2 months, but that's not enough to build a marriage on. Maybe not. Dylan's grip on her hand tightened slightly. But I know that I look forward to seeing you every morning. I know that the house feels empty when you're not in it. I know that when I saw that man threatening you, something in me went cold and hard, and I knew I'd do whatever it took to keep you safe. That's not love, that's just protection. Maybe it's not love yet, Dylan said quietly, but it could be, given time. He paused. I'm not offering this out of pity, Delilah. I'm offering because I want to. Because the idea of you leaving tears at something in me. If you married me, you'd have my name, my protection, and time to figure out what comes next. No pressure, no expectations. Just safety and space to heal. Delilah looked down at their joined hands. Everything in her life had taught her not to trust, not to rely on anyone but herself. But Dylan had been nothing but kind, nothing but honest. And the alternative was going back to Robert or running again, this time with even less than she'd started with. You'd really do this? She asked. Marry a woman you barely know, take on her legal troubles, risk everything you've built here? Yes. The simple certainty in that one word undid something in her chest. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, and because maybe I'm tired of being alone. Dylan's expression was open, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen from a man before. I'm not asking you to love me, Delilah. I'm just asking you to let me help. She thought about Robert's cold eyes, the way he'd looked at her like she was property to be retrieved. She thought about the past 2 months at the ranch, the quiet peace of working in the garden, the comfortable evenings sharing meals with Dylan. She thought about the future stretching ahead, uncertain but potentially filled with something better than what lay behind. All right, she said finally. I'll marry you. Dylan's face broke into a smile, and she realized it was the first time she'd seen him truly smile. It transformed his entire face, made him look younger, happier. We'll do it right, he said. Tomorrow we'll go into town, talk to the preacher, make it legal and proper. And then what? Then we figure it out as we go. He stood, pulling her to her feet. That's all anyone can do. They rode into Lordsburg the next morning in the buckboard wagon, both of them quiet with the weight of what they were about to do. Dylan had put on his Sunday clothes, a dark suit that made him look distinguished despite the cowboy boots. Delilah wore the one decent dress she owned, a simple blue cotton that Rosa had helped her mend and press. The preacher, Reverend Samuel Morrison, was a kindly man in his 60s who'd known Dylan since he was a boy. He listened to their story, or at least the version of it they chose to tell, and agreed to perform the ceremony that afternoon. "You're sure about this, son?" he asked Dylan while Delilah was out of earshot, arranging for witnesses. "I'm sure." Dylan didn't hesitate. "And you, Miss Harper?" The Reverend turned to Delilah when she returned. "Marriage is a sacred bond. I need to know you're entering into it of your own free will." Delilah thought about lying, about making up a story about love at first sight, but the Reverend's kind eyes seemed to see right through her. "My first marriage was a mistake," she said honestly. "This one is a choice. Maybe that's not the romance people expect, but it's the truth." Reverend Morrison nodded slowly. "Sometimes the best marriages are built on friendship and respect rather than passion. Passion fades, but those other things can last." He gestured toward the church. "Let's begin." The ceremony was simple, attended only by Martha from the restaurant and the deputy sheriff, who served as witnesses. Delilah spoke her vows in a clear voice, promising to honor and cherish this man who'd offered her safety when she had nothing. Dylan's voice was steady as he promised to love and protect her for as long as they both lived. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Dylan leaned in and brushed a chaste kiss across her lips. It was over in a moment, but Delilah felt the warmth of it settle somewhere deep inside her. They signed the papers, making it official. Delilah Matthews, where before there had been Delilah Harper. A new name, a new life. "Congratulations," Martha said, embracing them both. "You'll need to come by the restaurant for a celebration dinner before you head back." Dylan glanced at Delilah and she nodded. It seemed important to mark the occasion somehow, even if the marriage was more practical than romantic. At the restaurant, Martha outdid herself, bringing out roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie. Other townspeople stopped by to offer congratulations, curious about this sudden marriage but too polite to ask too many questions. Dylan handled them all with easy grace, his hand resting lightly on Delilah's back, a gesture of possession that should have bothered her but somehow didn't. They were finishing their pie when the door opened and Robert Harper walked in. He stopped when he saw them, his eyes narrowing as he took in their Sunday clothes and the way they sat together. "Well," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet restaurant, "isn't this cozy?" Dylan stood slowly, placing himself between Robert and Delilah. "You need to leave." "I just want to talk to my wife." "She's not your wife anymore." Dylan's voice was hard. "As of 2 hours ago, she's mine. We have the marriage certificate to prove it, legal and binding." Robert's face flushed with anger. "You can't do that. She was already married to me." "Was she?" Dylan pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "According to this statement from the county clerk in Santa Fe, there's no record of your marriage." Seems the preacher who performed the ceremony was never properly licensed, which means it wasn't legal. Never was. Delilah stared at Dylan in shock. She'd had no idea he'd done this research, but she should have known. He was thorough in everything he did. "That's a lie," Robert sputtered, but he didn't sound certain. "It's documented fact." Dylan handed the paper to the deputy sheriff, who'd remained at a nearby table. "You can verify it yourself, but the bottom line is this, Harper. Delilah is legally married to me now. If you continue to harass her, I'll have you arrested for disturbing the peace. If you touch her, I'll see you hang for assault. And if you ever set foot on my property again, I'll shoot you for trespassing. We clear?" The deputy looked over the document and nodded. "Seems to be in order, Mr. Harper. I suggest you accept the situation and move on." Robert's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he was smart enough to recognize he'd lost. "This isn't over," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes," Dylan said quietly, "it is." They watched Robert storm out of the restaurant, and Delilah felt something release in her chest. It was really over. She was free. "You researched our marriage?" she asked Dylan as they sat back down. "Soon as you told me his name. Figured if we needed ammunition, best to have it ready." He looked almost embarrassed. "Turns out the preacher who married you was defrocked a year before your ceremony. All his marriages were invalidated. So I was never legally married at all." "No, which means our marriage is your first, your only." He paused. "If that matters to you, it does." And she realized it was true. The idea that Robert had never had a legal claim on her, that the hell she'd lived through had at least been built on false foundations, gave her a strange sense of peace. They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, the sun turning the landscape gold and red. Neither of them spoke much, both processing the enormity of what they'd done. They were married now, bound together legally if not yet emotionally. As they pulled up to the house, Delilah felt a flutter of nervousness. This was their wedding night, such as it was. Would Dylan expect her to share his bed? She'd agreed to the marriage, but the physical aspect was something she hadn't let herself think about. Dylan seemed to sense her tension. As he helped her down from the wagon, he said quietly, "Nothing changes unless you want it to. You still have your room." "I still have mine. We're partners, Delilah, that's all. Thank you." The relief was almost overwhelming. "Don't thank me for treating you with basic decency." He gathered the supplies from the wagon. "I mean what I said earlier. No pressure, no expectations. We'll take this one day at a time." But as the weeks passed, something did change, slowly and naturally. They continued to share meals and conversation, but now there was a different quality to their interactions. Delilah found herself watching Dylan as he worked, admiring the easy strength in his movements, the care he took with the animals and the land. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of his laugh when something genuinely amused him. Dylan, for his part, seemed to relax around her in new ways. He told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about his parents and the brother who'd left. He asked her about her childhood, and she found herself opening up about the father she'd loved and lost, the dreams she'd had before Robert had crushed them. The garden flourished under Delilah's care, providing fresh vegetables for their table. She canned the excess, lining the pantry shelves with jars of tomatoes, beans, and pickles that would see them through the winter. Dylan built her a cold frame so she could extend the growing season, and she planted lettuce and herbs that thrived in the cooler weather. One evening in early October, about 3 months after their marriage, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The air had a bite to it now, promising the winter to come, and Delilah wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. "I've been thinking," Dylan said, rocking slowly in his chair, "about expanding the herd next spring, maybe diversifying too, getting some horses to break and sell. But it would mean hiring more hands, maybe building a second bunkhouse." "The ledgers show you can afford it," Delilah said. "You've had a good year." "We've had a good year." Dylan looked at her. "Your bookkeeping made a difference. I can see exactly where the money's going now. Plan better." "I'm glad I could help." She paused, gathering her courage. "Dylan, can I ask you something? Anything? Do you regret it, marrying me?" He stopped rocking and turned to face her fully. "Not for a single second. Do you?" "No," and she meant it. "It's just that sometimes I worry I'm taking advantage. You gave me everything and I've given you nothing in return." "That's not true." Dylan's voice was soft but intense. "You've given me company, conversation, someone to share my days with. You've made this house a home again. That's worth more than you know." "Is it enough, though? For a marriage, it's a start." He reached out and took her hand, a gesture that had become comfortable between them. "Delilah, I'm not going to lie to you. When we got married, I told myself it was just about helping you. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. I look forward to coming home because you're here. I find myself thinking about you when I'm out working. I want to make you smile, to see that light in your eyes when you talk about something that matters to you. Delilah's heart was beating fast. What are you saying? I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I already have. He squeezed her hand. I know you might not feel the same way, and that's all right. But I wanted you to know. You deserve honesty. She looked at their joined hands, thinking about the past few months, thinking about how her heart lifted when she heard his voice, how she felt safe in a way she never had before. Thinking about the warmth that spread through her when he smiled at her, the way she caught herself watching him when he didn't know she was looking. I think, she said slowly, that I might be falling in love with you too. Dylan's face lit up with that rare full smile. Yeah? Yeah. She laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. I wasn't expecting it. I thought I was done with love, done with trusting anyone. But you're different. You're steady and kind, and you make me feel like I can breathe again. He stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands warm on hers. Can I kiss you? Really kiss you this time? Yes, she whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she didn't want to. When his lips met hers, it was nothing like the brief ceremony kiss or the rough demands Robert used to make. This was gentle and questioning, a kiss that asked rather than took. She leaned into it, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her palms. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Dylan rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this right, he said. Court you properly, even though we're already married. Take you on picnics, bring you flowers, all the things I should have done before. You don't have to do that. I want to. He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. You deserve romance, Delilah. You deserve to be wooed and cherished. Just because we started backwards doesn't mean we can't do this right. And he did. Over the next few weeks, Dylan courted his wife with a determination that would have been amusing if it wasn't so touching. He brought her wildflowers from the range, their simple beauty more precious than any hothouse roses. He took her on rides to see the sunset from the hills overlooking the ranch, packing a basket with Rosa's tamales and fresh bread. He taught her to ride better, patient and encouraging as she learned to move with the horse instead of against it. They talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams. Dylan told her about wanting to build something lasting, a legacy that would outlive him. Delilah confessed that she'd always wanted to learn to read better, that her education had been cut short when her mother died. I'll teach you, Dylan said immediately. I've got books in the house, and we've got long winter evenings ahead of us. And he did, every night after dinner. They sat together in the living room, Dylan patient as Delilah worked through the words, her reading improving steadily. When she finished her first book, a collection of poetry Dylan's mother had loved, he kissed her in celebration. The kisses became more frequent, more heated. They still slept in separate rooms, but the tension between them was growing, a physical awareness that made the air feel charged whenever they were close to each other. One night in November, after a reading lesson that had ended with them kissing on the sofa, Dylan pulled back with obvious reluctance. Delilah, he said, his voice rough, I need to know what you want, from this marriage from me, because I want you. I want to share my bed with you, wake up next to you, build a life together in every sense of the word. But only if that's what you want too. She looked at him, this man who'd saved her and courted her and made her feel cherished. The fear she'd carried for so long had faded, replaced by something warm and sure. I want that too, she said. I want you. You're sure? I don't want you to feel pressured. I'm sure. She took his hand and stood, leading him toward the stairs. I'm choosing this, choosing you. They went to his room, larger than hers, with a big bed that had belonged to his parents. Dylan lit the lamp, keeping it low, and turned to face her. "I want to see you," he said. "All of you, but we'll go as slow as you need." She nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she began to unbutton her dress. He helped her, his hands gentle and patient, peeling away the layers of fabric until she stood before him in only her chemise. She waited for the familiar fear to rise, for the memories of Robert's rough hands and rougher words, but they didn't come. With Dylan, there was only warmth and desire and a feeling of rightness. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands sliding over her body with reverent care. When he lifted her and laid her on the bed, she went willingly, reaching for him as he shed his own clothes. His body was lean and hard from years of physical labor, and she traced the scars and calluses that marked his skin, each one telling a story of his life. Their coming together was slow and sweet, Dylan checking in with her constantly, making sure she was comfortable, that she wanted to continue. And she did. For the first time in her life, Delilah understood what people meant when they talked about physical love. This wasn't about power or control. It was about connection, about two people choosing to be vulnerable with each other, to give and take pleasure in equal measure. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Delilah's head on Dylan's chest, listening to the steady thump of his heartbeat. He ran his fingers through her hair, pressing kisses to the top of her head. "You all right?" he asked softly. "More than all right." She looked up at him. "Thank you. For what? For being patient, for being kind, for being you. Those things are easy when I love you." The words should have scared her, but instead they filled her with warmth. "I love you too," she said, testing out the words, finding them true. Dylan's arms tightened around her. "Stay here tonight, sleep beside me." "I plan to." She snuggled closer. "I plan to stay beside you for all the nights to come." Winter came to New Mexico in earnest, bringing cold nights and occasional snow that dusted the red earth white. Dylan and Delilah settled into their new dynamic, sharing a bed and building a life together. Carlos and Miguel noticed the change in their boss, the way he smiled more, the spring in his step even on the coldest mornings. Rosa brought them a Christmas cactus in a pot as a belated wedding gift, and Delilah placed it in the kitchen window where it caught the winter sun. The ranch operations slowed during the winter, giving Dylan more time at home, and they spent the long evenings reading together or playing cards or simply talking. In January, Delilah began to feel ill in the mornings, a persistent nausea that had her rushing for the chamber pot. She tried to hide it at first, not wanting to worry Dylan, but he noticed everything where she was concerned. "You should see the doctor," he said one morning after she'd been sick again. "It's probably just something I ate, for a week straight." He knelt beside where she sat on the bathroom floor, rubbing her back. "Please, Delilah, let me take you to town." The doctor was a middle-aged woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, the daughter of the man who ran the general store. She'd trained back east and returned to Lordsburg to serve the community. After examining Delilah, she smiled. "You're pregnant, Mrs. Matthews. About 8 weeks along, I'd say. Congratulations." Delilah stared at her in shock. A baby. She was going to have a baby, Dylan's baby. The news was overwhelming, terrifying, and wonderful all at once. Dylan was pacing in the waiting room when she emerged. He took one look at her face and rushed over. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." She took his hands. "I'm pregnant." He went very still, processing the information. Then a huge grin spread across his face. "We're having a baby." "We're having a baby." He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around right there in the doctor's office, laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with tears. "I love you," he said. "God, Delilah, I love you so much. I love you too." And she did, with a depth and certainty that still surprised her sometimes. This man who'd offered his name and his heart to a stranger had become the center of her world. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite the morning sickness that lasted through the 3rd month. Dylan was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly asking if she was comfortable, if she needed anything. Delilah found it endearing even when it was exasperating. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from lifting a basket of laundry. "I know, but you're carrying our child. Let me help." She softened at the look in his eyes. "All right, but I'm still doing my work. I'll go crazy if you make me sit around all day." They compromised, with Dylan taking over the heavier tasks, while Delilah continued to manage the books and do lighter household work. As her belly grew, she sewed new clothes for herself and began making baby things, tiny gowns and blankets and diapers. Rosa helped, teaching her the traditional patterns she'd used for her own children. Spring came and with it new life on the ranch. Calves were born in the warming weather, and Dylan expanded the herd as planned, hiring 2 new hands and building a second bunkhouse. The ranch was thriving, and so were they. One evening in May, Delilah stood in the doorway watching the sunset, one hand on her swollen belly. The baby was active today, kicking and rolling, reminding her constantly of its presence. Dylan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her, his hands covering hers over her stomach. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his chin resting on her shoulder. "How much has changed in a year? This time last year I was trapped in a nightmare. Now I'm here with you, carrying our child, happier than I ever imagined I could be." She turned her head to look at him. "You saved me, you know. We saved each other." He kissed her temple. "You gave me something to live for beyond just keeping the ranch running. You made me remember what it feels like to hope for the future." The baby kicked hard and Dylan laughed in delight. "Did you feel that?" "I feel every kick, every movement," she smiled. "I think we're going to have our hands full with this one. Bring it on." Dylan moved around to face her, taking both her hands. "I'm ready for whatever comes next, as long as I face it with you." In late July, when the heat was at its peak and the sun blazed down mercilessly, Delilah went into labor. Dr. Chen came to the ranch, setting up in the bedroom while Dylan paced downstairs, wearing a path in the floor. Rosa stayed with Delilah, offering comfort and encouragement through the long hours of labor. It was nearly dawn when the baby finally came, announcing his arrival with a lusty cry. "Doctor." Chen cleaned him up and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Delilah's arms. "You have a son," she said, smiling. Delilah looked down at the tiny face, red and scrunched from crying, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, with dark hair like hers and what looked like it would be Dylan's blue eyes. "Can Dylan come up?" she asked. Dr. Chen nodded and went to get him. Dylan burst into the room moments later, his face anxious until he saw Delilah sitting up in bed, holding their son. His expression transformed into something soft and awed. "Is everyone all right?" he asked, moving to the bedside. "Everyone's perfect." Delilah shifted the baby so Dylan could see him better. "Meet your son." Dylan sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the baby like he was seeing a miracle. "He's so small. He won't be for long." Delilah laughed softly. "Want to hold him?" She placed the baby in Dylan's arms, and he held his son with the same careful gentleness he'd always shown her. The baby quieted at his father's touch, seeming to recognize something safe and good. "What should we name him?" Dylan asked, unable to take his eyes off his son. They discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Delilah thought about it now, looking at her husband and son together. "Daniel," she said. "Daniel Dylan Matthews, Danny for short." "Daniel." Dylan tested it out. "Yeah, that's perfect." The first months of Danny's life were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Delilah had never been around babies much and found herself learning as she went, grateful for Rosa's advice and Dr. Chen's visits. Dylan was a hands-on father, changing diapers and walking the floor with Danny when he fussed, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice until the baby settled. The ranch continued to prosper, and Dylan's expansion plans paid off. By the time Danny was 6 months old, they were running 500 head of cattle and had started a successful horse-breaking operation. The ledgers showed a profit that allowed Dylan to hire even more help, freeing him up to spend more time with his family. One winter evening, when Danny was almost a year old and starting to walk, the three of them sat in the living room. Danny toddled between his parents, laughing with delight each time he successfully made it from one to the other. Dylan caught him and swung him up into the air, making him giggle. Delilah watched them, her heart full. This life, this family, was more than she'd ever dreamed of having. She thought about the woman who'd stumbled off that stagecoach 2 years ago, bruised and broken and desperate. That woman would never have believed she could be this happy. "What are you smiling about?" Dylan asked, settling Danny on his lap. "Just thinking about how far we've come. We've come a long way." He reached out his free hand to her and she took it, and we've got a long way to go yet together. Over the next few years, the ranch continued to grow and so did their family. When Danny was 3, Delilah gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Emily, who looked like miniature versions of their mother. Dylan built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family, adding bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The children grew up surrounded by love and the wide, open spaces of the ranch. Danny learned to ride almost before he could walk properly, following his father around like a shadow. The twins were more interested in helping their mother in the garden, though they also loved playing in the barn with the new kittens Carlos's cat had produced. When Danny was 7 and the twins were 4, Delilah found herself pregnant again. This time, the baby was another boy whom they named Thomas. He had Dylan's blue eyes from birth and a calm temperament that made him easy compared to his more rambunctious siblings. Through it all, Dylan and Delilah's love continued to deepen. They had their disagreements, of course, the normal friction of two people building a life together. But they'd learned to talk through problems, to respect each other's opinions, to compromise when needed. The foundation of trust and respect they'd built in those early days held strong. One evening, when Danny was 10 and Thomas was 3, Dylan and Delilah sat on the porch after putting the children to bed. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of the day. Dylan pulled out a small box from his pocket and handed it to her. "What's this?" Delilah asked, surprised. "Open it." Inside was a gold ring with a small diamond, simple but beautiful. Delilah looked at Dylan in confusion. "I have a wedding ring." "That was a plain band bought in a hurry when we got married." Dylan took the ring and slipped it on her finger next to the original band. "You deserve something special, something that shows how much you mean to me." Delilah looked at the ring sparkling in the lamplight, tears pricking her eyes. "Dylan, you didn't have to do this. I wanted to." "You've given me everything, Delilah. 4 beautiful children, a home filled with love and laughter, a reason to wake up happy every morning. That's worth more than any ring could ever be, but I wanted you to have something tangible, something that shows the world how much I treasure you." She threw her arms around him, holding tight. "I love you so much. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life." "Believe it." He kissed her hair. "You're stuck with me now for better or worse." "Sounds pretty good to me." As the years passed, the Matthews family became a fixture in Lordsburg. Dylan served on the town council, helping make decisions about the community's growth. Delilah started a lending library in their home, sharing the books she'd collected over the years with anyone who wanted to read them. The children attended the small school in town, and Danny showed an early aptitude for numbers that had his mother beaming with pride. The ranch continued to thrive, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Dylan's fair treatment of his workers and his reputation for honest dealing meant he had no trouble hiring good men when he needed them. Carlos eventually retired, and his son Miguel took over as foreman, with his own sons joining the operation. When Danny turned 18, Dylan officially made him a partner in the ranch, teaching him everything he'd learned about running a successful cattle operation. The twins, now 15, were already showing interest in expanding into agriculture, wanting to grow the garden operation into something more substantial. Thomas, at 11, declared he wanted to be a veterinarian, having shown a natural gift with animals from an early age. One afternoon in the summer of 1893, 15 years after that day, Delilah had arrived in Lordsburg with nothing but a black eye and empty pockets. She stood in the garden watching her family. Dylan and Danny were working on repairing a section of fence, their heads bent together in conversation. The twins were weeding the vegetable beds, arguing good-naturedly about something. Thomas was in the barn with a horse that had thrown a shoe, carefully examining its hoof. Rosa came up beside her, older now but still strong, still the heart of the extended ranch family. "You've built something beautiful here," Rosa said, following her gaze. "We all did," Delilah replied. "Dylan and I couldn't have done any of this without people like you and Carlos, Miguel, and all the others who have become family. Still, it started with you and Dylan, with the choice you both made to take a chance on each other." Rosa patted her arm. "Love isn't always lightning strikes and grand gestures. Sometimes it's a cowboy offering his name to a woman who needed saving, and that woman choosing to trust him. Sometimes the best love stories start with two broken people deciding to heal together." Delilah thought about that as she watched her husband straighten up from his work and scan the property, his gaze finding her almost immediately. Even after all these years, he still looked for her, still made sure she was near. He waved and she waved back, seeing the smile that crossed his face. That evening, after the children were in bed and the ranch had settled into nighttime quiet, Dylan and Delilah walked out to the spot where he'd first brought her on one of their early courtship rides. They could see the lights of Lordsburg in the distance and the stars spread out overhead in a glittering blanket. "You ever think about that day," Dylan asked, his arm around her shoulders, "when you stepped off that stage coach, sometimes?" Delilah leaned into him. "It feels like a different life, like it happened to a different person. In a way, it did. We're both different people than we were then. Better people, I think. Definitely better." Dylan turned to face her, his hands on her waist. "I never told you this, but I almost didn't approach you that day. I saw you stumble and thought maybe I should mind my own business, let you figure things out yourself. What made you change your mind, your eyes? Even hurt and scared and exhausted, there was fire in them. You looked like someone who'd fight back against whatever life threw at you. I wanted to know that person, wanted to see what you'd do with a fair chance." He smiled. "Best decision I ever made walking over to you." "Second best," Delilah corrected. "The best was asking me to marry you." "True enough." He kissed her, the same gentle reverence that had been in his first real kiss to her, combined with the passion of 15 years of love and life shared. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Thank you," Delilah said softly. "For what? For seeing me. For saving me. For loving me." She took his hand. "For giving me a life I never dreamed I could have. Thank you for letting me." Dylan squeezed her hand. "For trusting me enough to take that chance. For making me a husband and a father. For filling my life with joy." They stood there together as the stars wheeled overhead, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something lasting. The ranch sprawled around them, full of life and love, and the legacy they were creating for their children. It wasn't the story Delilah had imagined for herself when she was young, but it was better than anything she could have dreamed. The years continued to roll by, bringing new challenges and new joys. Danny married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and their wedding was the social event of the season in Lordsburg. The twins both went east for education, Sarah studying agriculture and Emily training as a teacher, but both returned home to New Mexico, unable to stay away from the land they loved. Thomas fulfilled his dream of becoming a veterinarian, setting up practice in Lordsburg, but spending most of his time at the ranch, unable to resist the call of working with animals. Dylan and Delilah became grandparents, delighting in the next generation while still running the ranch together. They'd trained their children well, and the Matthews Ranch continued to prosper under the family's stewardship. Danny proved to have his father's head for business and his mother's attention to detail, making decisions that kept the operation growing. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Dylan surprised Delilah with a trip to Denver, the two of them leaving the ranch in their children's capable hands for 2 weeks. They stayed in a fancy hotel, attended the opera, ate in restaurants, and spent lazy mornings in bed like newlyweds. It was a different kind of adventure than their daily life, but Delilah found herself missing the ranch, missing the rhythm of their normal days. "Ready to go home?" Dylan asked on the last morning of their trip. "So ready." Delilah laughed. "I love this, but I miss our life, our real life." "Me too," he pulled her close. "Though I've enjoyed having you all to myself for a while. We'll have to do this again sometime, but not for too long. I want to be home." Home. The word carried so much weight, so much meaning. Home was the ranch, the house Dylan had built and they'd filled with love. Home was their children and grandchildren, the extended family of workers who'd been with them for years. Home was the land itself, harsh and beautiful, and theirs. They returned to find everything running smoothly, their children having managed perfectly well without them. That night, they sat on the porch as they'd done thousands of times before, watching the sun set over land they'd built together. 20 years, Delilah mused. Feels like both forever and no time at all. "I know what you mean." Dylan rocked slowly in his chair. "Sometimes I still see that woman who got off the stagecoach, all fire and fear. Other times, I can barely remember what life was like before you." "I can remember," Delilah said quietly. "I remember being scared all the time. Remember thinking I'd never be safe, never be happy. Remember believing I was broken beyond repair. You were never broken, just hurt. There's a difference. I know that now, but it took you to help me see it." She reached over and took his hand. "You gave me everything, Dylan. Your name, your home, your heart. You gave me a life worth living. You did the same for me. I was going through the motions before you came. Working hard, building the ranch, but not really living. You brought color back into the world." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue, stars beginning to emerge. Somewhere in the house, they could hear their grandchildren laughing, the sound of family filling the spaces between walls. "What do you think happens next?" Delilah asked. "We've built the ranch, raised our children, started seeing grandchildren. What's the next chapter? Whatever we want it to be." Dylan stood and pulled her to her feet. "Maybe we focus on teaching the grandchildren. Maybe we take more trips, see more of the world. Maybe we just keep doing what we're doing, enjoying each day as it comes." "I like that last option." "Me too." He wrapped his arms around her. "As long as I'm with you, I don't much care what we do. You're my home, Delilah. You have been since that first day, even if I didn't know it yet." And you're mine." She stood on her toes to kiss him. "My cowboy who offered his name and his heart. Best thing that ever happened to me." As they stood together under the vast New Mexico sky, Delilah thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate woman stumbling off a stagecoach to this, a life filled with love and purpose and belonging. Dylan had offered her safety when she needed it most, but what they'd built together was so much more than that. They'd built a partnership, a family, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. The years continued to pass, gentle and kind. Dylan's hair turned gray, and Delilah's face gained lines that mapped out a life of smiles and laughter. They moved a bit slower, but their love remained strong, the foundation they'd built proving unshakable. When Dylan was 64 and Delilah was 61, they celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch had grown into a sprawling operation, one of the most successful in the territory, now state, of New Mexico. But more important than the financial success was the family they'd built, the community of love that extended far beyond blood. That night, lying in bed together, Dylan pulled Delilah close. "You remember what I told you that first day?" he asked. "That I'd offer you work and nothing more." "I remember. I lied." He smiled in the darkness. "Not intentionally, but I lied anyway. From the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. I told myself I was just helping someone in need, but the truth is, I was already falling in love. It just took me a while to admit it." "I'm glad you lied." Delilah traced patterns on his chest. "I'm glad you let yourself fall." "I'm glad you gave me the space to fall too. No regrets, not a single one." "Well, maybe one." Dylan tensed slightly. "What?" "That I didn't meet you sooner, that we didn't get even more years together." She kissed him softly. "But I'll take what we got. It's been more than enough." "It's been everything," Dylan agreed. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, the way they'd slept for 38 years. Outside, the ranch settled into nighttime quiet, the land they'd tended together resting under the stars. Inside, their family slept under the roof Dylan had built and Delilah had made a home. The story that had started with a desperate woman and a kind cowboy had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of love and trust, and taking chances on each other. It was a love story for the ages, written across the harsh and beautiful landscape of the West, proving that sometimes the best happy endings come from the most unlikely beginnings. Years later, when Dylan and Delilah had both passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, their family gathered at the ranch to celebrate their lives. Danny, now running the ranch with his own children, stood on the porch where his parents had spent so many evenings together. "They built this," he said to his siblings, gesturing at the ranch spread out before them. "Not just the buildings and the business, but this family, this legacy of love and respect and hard work. That's what they gave us." Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "I asked Mother once why she never talked much about her life before the ranch. She said because it didn't matter. Her life started the day she met Father, and everything before that was just preparation for finding her way home." "He used to say the same thing," Emily added. "That his real life began the day he saw her step off that stagecoach, said he'd been waiting for her without knowing it." Thomas smiled through his own tears. "They were lucky to find each other." "Not just lucky," Danny corrected. "Brave." It took courage for Mother to accept Father's help, to trust him after everything she'd been through. It took courage for Father to open his heart when he'd been alone for so long. They chose each other, every single day, and that's what made it work. The Matthews family continued the traditions Dylan and Delilah had started, running the ranch with the same combination of business sense and heart. They told their children stories about their grandparents, about the woman who'd arrived with nothing and the cowboy who'd offered her everything, and how together they'd built something that lasted. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the New Mexico landscape and the stars began to emerge, sometimes the family swore they could feel their presence. Dylan and Delilah watching over the ranch and the family they'd created, together even in death as they had been in life. Their love story had started with a black eye and empty pockets, with an offer of a name and a heart, and it had bloomed into something extraordinary, a legacy that would continue for generations to come. The end.